August 1944. German generals watched in disbelief as American tanks advanced 50 miles per day, an impossible pace that shattered every rule of warfare they knew. Their intelligence dismissed it as Allied propaganda until captured Wehrmacht officers saw the truth. An endless convoy of 6,000 trucks, driven mostly by black soldiers, running 24/7 on a highway that delivered more supplies in 1 month than Germany's entire rail system could manage in 3. How did the world's most disciplined military lose a war to an army that treated ice cream and Coca-Cola as essential combat supplies?
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. August 1944. The air in the German 7th Army headquarters smelled of old paper, cigarette smoke, and something else, the faint scent of worry that no one would admit was there. General Gunther Blumentritt stood over a map table in a chateau near the French town of Alençon, studying red marks that showed where American forces had been yesterday. The problem was simple and terrifying. Those red marks were moving too fast. 50 miles in a single day, then another 50. It was impossible. Armies did not move like that. Armies needed time to rest, to refuel, to bring up ammunition and food. Yet the Americans kept coming, like a flood that never stopped. Blumentritt had spent 30 years learning how war worked. He studied at the finest military academies in Prussia, where they taught that battles were won by smart generals who could outthink their enemies. He learned about Napoleon and Frederick the Great, men who moved armies like chess pieces and crushed their foes through brilliant tactics. Supply lines were important, yes, but they were boring details that lesser officers handled. Real generals focused on the big picture: where to attack, when to retreat, how to trick the enemy into a trap. That was the art of war. That was what mattered. Around the table stood other German officers, their uniforms still crisp despite weeks of fighting. They had been winning battles for 5 years. They had conquered Poland in weeks, France in months, pushed deep into Russia with speed that shocked the world. The German way of war was called Blitzkrieg, lightning war. Fast tanks, screaming dive bombers, soldiers trained to move quickly and hit hard. It worked because German officers were smart and German soldiers were disciplined. Everyone knew this. It was a fact as solid as stone. But now something was wrong. The Americans had broken out of Normandy, that marshy area near the beaches where they had been stuck for weeks after D-Day. German commanders had been happy about that. Let them stay trapped in the hedgerows, bleeding themselves dry against German defenses. Let them waste their men and tanks in those narrow country lanes. Eventually, they would give up or make a mistake, and then the Wehrmacht would push them back into the sea. That was the plan. It was a good plan, except the Americans had not followed it. An intelligence officer entered the room carrying a folder of reports. He was young, maybe 25, with dark circles under his eyes from too many late nights. He spread aerial photographs across the map table. The photos showed roads packed with vehicles, American trucks, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Lines of trucks stretching as far as the camera could see, all heading east towards the front lines. The young officer cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, our reconnaissance planes took these yesterday. The Americans have established what they call a supply highway. It runs from the coast all the way to their forward units. They have closed it to all normal traffic. Only military trucks are allowed." Blumentritt picked up one of the photos and held it close to his face. The image was grainy and black, but he could see the trucks clearly enough. They were moving in both directions, full ones going forward, empty ones coming back, like a river flowing in 2 directions at once. He set the photo down and shook his head. This cannot be accurate. No army operates like this. Where are their trains? Where are their supply depots? This is chaos, not logistics. Another general, a heavy man with a scar across his cheek, laughed. It was not a happy laugh. The Americans are wealthy, we know this. They have more trucks than sense. But trucks alone do not win wars. Trucks break down, trucks need fuel, trucks need maintenance. This is why we use trains. Trains are efficient, trains are reliable. These photos show us that the Americans are amateurs, rich amateurs, but amateurs nonetheless. The room murmured in agreement. It felt good to say these things, to remind themselves that Germany had the better system, the smarter officers, the superior way of making war. Yes, American factories could build many trucks. Everyone knew America had factories. But having things and using things well were two different matters entirely. A farmer with 1,000 tools was still just a farmer. What mattered was skill, training, discipline, and the German army had more of all three than any force in the world. But Blumentritt could not shake a feeling in his gut, a cold sensation that whispered something was deeply wrong. He had seen the reports from the front lines. German units were running out of fuel. Panzer divisions sat motionless because their tanks had empty fuel tanks. Meanwhile, American tanks kept moving, kept attacking, kept pushing forward even when logic said they should stop. Where was their fuel coming from? How were they feeding their soldiers? The Americans had landed in France only 2 months ago, and already they were racing across the countryside like they owned it. He asked the intelligence officer, "How many trucks do they have on this highway?" The young man checked his notes. "We estimate at least 5,000, possibly 6,000. They run day and night, in convoys. Every truck is marked with a red circle painted on the side. The French civilians call it the Red Ball Express." 5,000 trucks. Blumentritt tried to imagine what that meant. A single truck could carry maybe 5 tons of supplies. 5,000 trucks meant, he did the math in his head, 25,000 tons moving at once. And if they ran all day and all night, making multiple trips, the numbers became enormous. Bigger than anything the German army could match, bigger than seemed possible.
The scarred general waved his hand dismissively. Propaganda numbers. The Americans always exaggerate. They want us to think they are stronger than they are. It is psychological warfare, nothing more. But what if it was not an exaggeration? What if the numbers were real? Blumentritt looked at the map again, at those red marks showing American positions. They had advanced past towns that should have held them for weeks. They had broken through defenses that should have stopped them cold. And they had done it all while keeping their tanks fueled and their soldiers fed. That required something more than luck or bravery. It required a supply system that actually worked. The meeting ended with orders to fight harder, to hold every position, to make the Americans pay for every mile. Good orders, the kind that generals had been giving for centuries. But as the officers filed out of the room, Blumentritt stayed behind. He picked up one of the aerial photographs again and studied it in the fading afternoon light. The line of trucks looked like ants marching to and from a nest, endless and organized and utterly relentless. German trucks were precious things. When one broke down, mechanics worked for days to fix it because there was no replacement. Spare parts came slowly, if they came at all. Fuel was rationed down to the last liter. Every resource had to be guarded, saved, stretched as far as possible. But these American trucks seemed almost disposable, as if losing one meant nothing because 10 more would take its place. It was a different way of thinking about war, a way that Blumentritt had never encountered in all his years of training. The Prussian military academies taught that good generals made careful plans and used their resources wisely. They taught that brilliance in battle came from doing more with less, from outsmarting the enemy through clever tactics. They never taught what to do when the enemy simply had so much that tactics did not matter anymore. Outside the chateau window, the summer evening was beautiful.
Green fields stretched to the horizon under a golden sky. It looked peaceful, like war was happening somewhere else. But Blumentritt knew better. Out on those roads, right now, thousands of American trucks were driving through the darkness, their headlights forming rivers of light, carrying bullets and beans and bandages and fuel to soldiers who will use them tomorrow to push even deeper into France. And there was nothing he could do to stop them. The war, he was beginning to suspect, might already be over. Not because of any battle, not because of any brilliant American general, but because of trucks. Simple, boring, unglamorous trucks driven by men whose names would never appear in history books. How does an army fight against that? How does tactical genius defeat endless supply? These were questions Blumentritt did not want to answer, because he feared he already knew what the answers would be.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Captain Klaus Weber crouched in a ditch beside a country road in eastern France, trying very hard not to be seen. 3 days ago, his unit had been surrounded by American tanks. Most of his men were dead or captured. Weber had escaped by crawling through a wheat field for 2 miles, and now he was trying to reach German lines on foot. He was hungry, exhausted, and his uniform was caked with mud. But none of that mattered when he heard the sound. A low rumble, like distant thunder, except the sky was clear. The sound grew louder. Weber peeked over the edge of the ditch, and his mouth fell open. Trucks. More trucks than he had ever seen in his life. They filled the entire road, moving bumper to bumper in a line that stretched as far as he could see in both directions. Big American GMC trucks, painted olive green, each one marked with a red circle on the door. They drove fast, maybe 30 miles per hour, one passing every 30 seconds or so. Weber counted in his head. 2 trucks per minute meant 120 per hour. If they kept this up all day, that would be almost 3,000 trucks. And judging by the worn look of the road and the tire marks everywhere, they had been doing this for weeks. What shocked Weber even more was who was driving. Most of the drivers were black soldiers. In the German army, Weber had been taught that America was weak because different races could not work together. The Nazi propaganda said black people were inferior, that they could never handle important jobs. Yet here they were, controlling the entire American supply system. They drove with skill and confidence, handling the big trucks like they had been born behind the wheel. Some were smoking cigarettes. A few were singing. One driver saw Weber's helmet sticking up from the ditch and waved at him cheerfully before roaring past. Weber ducked down, his heart pounding. Everything he had been told was wrong. These men were not confused or helpless. They were running a machine, a massive organized system that moved with perfect rhythm. He waited until dark and then followed the road on foot, staying in the shadows. Every few miles he saw something new that made his understanding of war crumble a little more. He passed a supply dump where American soldiers were unloading crates under bright electric lights powered by generators. The lights were so bright they hurt his eyes. In the German army, night work meant stumbling around with dim flashlights, trying not to waste batteries. Here the Americans had turned night into day, and they were working as fast as if the sun was up. Weber saw mountains of supplies. Wooden crates stacked 3 stories high. Canvas tarps covering piles of equipment that spread across an entire field. One area held nothing but jerry cans full of gasoline, thousands of them, more fuel than Weber's entire division had seen in a month. A group of American soldiers sat nearby eating from tin cans. Weber was close enough to smell the food. Meat, real meat, not the ersatz garbage that German soldiers choked down. One American soldier opened a small cardboard box and pulled out a bar of chocolate. He ate half and tossed the rest to a buddy. They were throwing away chocolate. Weber's stomach twisted with hunger. He had not seen chocolate in 2 years. His wife and children back in Germany dreamed about chocolate. These men used it like it was nothing. Weber kept walking, and an hour later heard a strange hissing sound. He crept closer and found himself staring at something impossible. A concrete barge had been pulled up onto the riverbank, and inside it was a factory making ice cream. Actual ice cream in the middle of a war zone. American soldiers lined up with bowls while a machine pumped out frozen vanilla cream. The sign on the barge said it could make 10 gallons per minute. Weber watched a soldier get a huge scoop of ice cream, eat it quickly, and get back in line for seconds. No one stopped him, no one rationed it. There was just more ice cream, always more. In Germany, people were starving. His own mother wrote letters about how she traded her wedding ring for a loaf of bread. His children had never tasted ice cream. They didn't know what it was. And here were Americans, thousands of miles from home, eating ice cream like they were at a Sunday picnic. This was not war as Weber understood it. This was something else entirely. He stumbled on through the night, and near dawn came across another convoy stopped for a break. Trucks lined both sides of the road. Drivers stretched their legs, drank coffee from thermoses, and smoked. Weber hid behind a tree and watched. One truck's engine was smoking badly, clearly broken. 2 mechanics looked at it for maybe 5 minutes, then shook their heads. They took a few tools out of the truck, grabbed some supplies from the back, and just walked away. They left the truck sitting there, broken and abandoned. 10 minutes later, another truck pulled up. The driver hopped out, walked over to the abandoned truck, shook his head, and kept going. No one seemed worried. No one tried to fix it. They just left it behind like it was trash. That was when Weber truly understood. In the German army, a broken truck was a disaster. Mechanics would work for days to repair it because there was no replacement. Parts were stripped from other vehicles. Officers screamed about waste. Every piece of equipment was precious and irreplaceable. But the Americans had so many trucks that losing one meant nothing. They could afford to throw trucks away. They could afford to waste chocolate and make ice cream and light up the night and feed their soldiers like kings. They had so much that being wasteful was easier than being careful. Weber finally reached German lines the next morning, half dead from exhaustion and hunger. When officers questioned him about what he saw, he told them everything. They didn't believe him. One major laughed and said Weber must have been seeing things, that exhaustion and fear played tricks on the mind. But Weber knew what he saw. He had seen the future, and the future was a highway full of trucks driven by men his country had said were inferior, carrying more supplies than Germany could produce in a year. He had seen an army that won not through tactics or bravery, but through simple, overwhelming abundance. And he knew, deep in his bones, that Germany had already lost this war. The only question left was how long it would take everyone else to realize it. General Blumentritt sat in a cold room in November reading captured American documents that his intelligence officers had brought him. The papers smelled like fresh ink and American cigarettes. They were supply manifests, boring lists of numbers that showed what the Red Ball Express had delivered over the past 3 months. Blumentritt read the numbers 3 times because he couldn't believe them. 800,000 tons. The Americans had moved 800,000 tons of supplies in just 3 months using nothing but trucks on a single highway. He picked up a pencil and did the math on a piece of scratch paper. Germany's entire industrial output for a month was about the same amount. The Americans had matched his entire country's production using 1 road and some trucks. Not even their best effort, just 1 supply line out of many.
He set the papers down and rubbed his eyes. For 30 years he had studied war. He knew every battle Napoleon ever fought. He could recite the campaigns of Frederick the Great from memory. He had read Clausewitz until the words were burned into his brain. All those books talked about tactics and strategy, about flanking maneuvers and defensive positions, about the genius of great generals who won against impossible odds. Not one of them had prepared him for this. Not one had explained what to do when the enemy could simply make more of everything than you could ever destroy. The door opened and Captain Weber walked in. Blumentritt had asked to speak with him after reading his report about the Red Ball Express. Weber looked thin and tired. He had been fighting for 5 years, and it showed in the lines around his eyes. Blumentritt gestured for him to sit. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Finally, Blumentritt said, "Tell me again about the truck they abandoned." Weber nodded slowly. "It was broken, sir. The engine was smoking. 2 mechanics looked at it for maybe 5 minutes and then just walked away. They left it sitting on the side of the road like it was garbage. An hour later, I saw another broken truck. Same thing. They took what they needed and left it behind." Blumentritt felt something cold settle in his chest. We repair our trucks. We have to. If we lose a truck, we lose capability. We lose the ability to move supplies. So we fix them, no matter how long it takes. "Yes, sir," Weber said quietly. "But they have so many trucks that fixing one wastes more time than it saves. It is easier to just get another truck. I watch them do it. They do not think like us at all." That was the heart of it, Blumentritt realized. The Americans did not think like Germans. German officers were taught to be efficient, to use resources carefully, to make every bullet count. The German way was about precision and skill. A German tank was better engineered than an American tank. A German soldier had better training than an American soldier. These facts were true, but they did not matter. The Americans had realized something that German generals never understood. They had learned that in modern war, the side that could make more things faster would always win. Tactics meant nothing if you ran out of bullets. Brilliant strategy meant nothing if your tanks had no fuel. Blumentritt thought about his own situation. His army was starving. Not just hungry, but actually starving. Soldiers fainted during marches because they had not eaten in 2 days. Horses pulling supply wagons were so thin, their ribs showed through their skin. Meanwhile, every captured American soldier they questioned told the same story. 3 meals a day, always. Hot food when possible. Coffee, chocolate, cigarettes as standard. One captured American private had been carrying more food in his pack than a German officer received in a week. The private said he was saving it for a snack. A snack! Blumentritt wanted to laugh but could not find the energy. His country was tearing itself apart trying to feed its army, and the Americans packed snacks. They shipped ice cream to the front lines. They gave their soldiers Coca-Cola like it was water. They had so much abundance that waste was built into the system. And that abundance was the weapon that was destroying Germany more effectively than any bomb or bullet. He picked up another captured document. This one was a maintenance report for American vehicles. It showed that the Americans expected a certain percentage of trucks to break down. They planned for it. They built extra trucks knowing some would be lost. They created redundancy on purpose, accepting inefficiency as the price of keeping everything moving. To a German officer trained in precision, it looked insane. But it worked. God help them, it worked better than the German system ever had. Weber shifted in his chair. "Sir, may I speak freely?" "Yes. I think we lost this war before it started. Not because of any battle. We lost it in their factories. In Detroit and Pittsburgh and places I cannot pronounce. They built so much that our best effort could never match it. Even if every German soldier fought perfectly, even if every tank crew hit their target, it would not matter. They have 10 tanks for every one we destroy. They have 100 trucks for every one we capture. How do you fight that?" Blumentritt had no answer. He had spent his whole life learning to fight battles. But this was not a battle. This was something bigger, something that made battles almost meaningless. The Americans had turned war into a production problem. They solved it the same way they built cars and made steel and fed cities. through massive, organized systems that created abundance. Germany had tried to win through superior skill and training. America had won through superior supply chains. December came, and with it, the coldest winter in decades. German soldiers froze in thin uniforms because there was no winter clothing. They fought with rifles that jammed in the cold because there was no oil to clean them. They went hungry because supply trains could not get through. And across the lines, American soldiers opened packages from home. They ate turkey dinners on Christmas Day, served by their own army in the field. They drank hot coffee and smoked fresh cigarettes and stayed warm in insulated tents. A captured German lieutenant brought into an American camp on Christmas Eve stared at the feast being prepared and began to cry. Not from sadness, but from the shock of understanding. His family in Berlin was eating watery soup made from potato peels. His captors were serving him roasted turkey with all the trimmings, as much as he could eat, like it was nothing.
That lieutenant wrote in his diary that night words that Blumentritt would read months later. They did not defeat us with weapons, they defeated us with wealth. They showed us that all our training, all our sacrifice, all our belief in discipline and duty meant nothing against a nation that could simply make more of everything. I thought war was about courage. I was wrong. War is about supply trucks and factory production and miles of highway. We lost to men driving trucks, and I will never think about power the same way again. Blumentritt closed the diary and stared out the window into the winter darkness. Somewhere out there, the Red Ball Express was still running, still delivering, still winning the war, one truckload at a time. Captain Klaus Weber stepped off the train in Hamburg in the summer of 1946. The war had been over for more than a year, but the station looked like a bomb had hit it yesterday. Half the roof was missing, broken glass crunched under his feet. The walls were black with soot and covered in bullet holes. He carried everything he owned in a small canvas bag that an American guard had given him when they released him from the prisoner of war camp. Inside the bag were 2 spare shirts, a pair of pants, a bar of American soap that he was saving, and a small notebook where he had written down everything he learned. The smell hit him first. Hamburg smelled like rot and dust and despair. Piles of rubble lined every street. Buildings stood like broken teeth, their walls cracked and leaning. Children in dirty clothes picked through the ruins looking for anything useful, anything they could sell or trade. An old woman pushed a cart full of bricks, moving them from one pile to another for reasons Weber could not understand. Maybe she was trying to rebuild, maybe she just needed something to do. The city felt dead in a way that went beyond the physical damage. It felt like the soul had been bombed out of it. Weber walked through streets he barely recognized. The shop where he bought bread before the war was gone. The cafe where he met his wife was a crater. Even the street signs were missing, melted down for scrap metal years ago. He navigated by memory and luck, turning corners and hoping he was going the right way. It took him 3 hours to walk what used to be a 30-minute trip. Finally, he found his building, or what was left of it. The top 2 floors collapsed. The windows on the remaining floors were boarded up with whatever people could find, old doors, pieces of furniture, sheets of metal. He climbed the stairs in darkness because there was no electricity. The stairwell smelled like mold and human waste. His wife Anna opened the door before he could knock. She must have heard his footsteps. She looked so thin that it scared her. Her dress hung loose on her frame like it was 3 sizes too big. Her hair was gray now, though she was only 31. But her eyes were the same, and when she saw him, she made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. They held each other in the doorway and did not speak for a long time. What was there to say? They had both survived, and that was more than many could claim. Inside the apartment, his 2 children stared at him like he was a stranger. His daughter was 9 now, his son was 7. They had been 4 and 2 when he left. They did not remember him.
His daughter held a doll made from rags and string. His son's shirt was sewn together from 3 different pieces of fabric that did not match. The apartment had 2 rooms, cold and dark. The furniture was gone, probably burned for heat during the winter. They sat on the floor because there were no chairs. Anna made tea from hot water and some dried leaves that might have been tea once, or might have been something else. There was no sugar, there was barely anything. She apologized for not having food to offer him. Weber opened his bag and took out a chocolate bar he had saved from his last day in the American camp. It was melted and rehardened, misshapen and ugly, but it was real chocolate. He broke it into pieces and gave some to each child. They ate slowly, making it last, their eyes wide with wonder. His daughter asked if they were rich now. The question broke his heart. That night, after the children were asleep on a pile of blankets in the corner, Anna told him what the years had been like. How the bombs fell and kept falling. How food disappeared from the stores and never came back. How she traded her wedding ring for a loaf of bread and her winter coat for a bag of potatoes. Some days she found nothing to eat and had to watch her children cry from hunger. How she told them stories to distract them from the pain in their bellies. How some nights she prayed they would not wake up because at least then they would not be hungry anymore. Weber told her about the Red Ball Express, about the highways full of trucks and the mountains of supplies, and the ice cream barge and the chocolate bars thrown away like garbage. He told her about American soldiers who complained when their coffee was not hot enough, who left food on their plates because they were full, who had so much that waste was normal. Anna listened without speaking. When he finished, she said quietly, "We were told America was weak. We were told we would win." "We were told many things," Weber said. "Most of them were lies." The next morning, Weber went looking for work. He walked past burned factories and closed shops and buildings that would never be rebuilt. At an office run by British occupation forces, he stood in line for 4 hours with 100 other men, all of them looking for any job that would pay enough to feed their families. The officer who interviewed him asked what skills he had. Weber said he had been a logistics officer in the Wehrmacht. He knew how to manage supplies, how to coordinate transport, and how to keep track of inventory. The British officer's eyes lit up. They needed people who understood supply chains. The Allies were trying to rebuild Germany, and they needed it done fast. Weber got assigned to work at a distribution center where American and British supplies came in and got sent out to German cities. It was strange, almost funny in a dark way. The same trucks that had defeated him were now feeding him. GMC trucks, some with the Red Ball marks still painted on their doors, rolled through Hamburg delivering food and medicine and building materials. The same system that crushed the Wehrmacht was now keeping Germany alive.
Weber stood in the warehouse watching crates get unloaded and thought about the irony. The Americans had beaten him with trucks, and now they were saving him with trucks. He learned quickly that the Allies were using the same methods they used during the war. Everything was organized, standardized, tracked. Every crate had a number. Every truck had a route. Every delivery was scheduled and recorded. It was the Red Ball Express all over again, except this time it was bringing reconstruction instead of destruction. Weber took notes in his little notebook. He wrote down how they organized the warehouse, how they tracked inventory, how they scheduled deliveries to maximize efficiency. He wrote down the American way of thinking about problems, not trying to be perfect, but trying to be fast and reliable. Good enough today was better than perfect next month. Other German workers complained that the American system was wasteful and sloppy. They said German methods were better, more precise, more efficient. Weber did not argue with them, but he knew they were wrong. He had seen what precision without abundance looked like. It looked like his children eating ersatz bread made from sawdust while their father fought in a war that was already lost.
The American system worked because it accepted that some things would be wasted, some trucks would break down, and some deliveries would be late. But the system kept moving anyway. It was designed to handle failure and keep going. The German system was designed to be perfect, and when it failed, everything collapsed. Years passed. Weber kept working in logistics. He moved from the British distribution centre to a German company that made car parts, then to a bigger company that needed someone to organize their supply chain. He took the lessons from his notebook and applied them. He convinced his bosses to keep extra inventory, even though it seemed wasteful, because having extra meant production never stopped when deliveries were late. He convinced them to standardize parts across different products so they could be made faster and cheaper. He convinced them to treat suppliers like partners instead of enemies, to share information so everyone could plan better. These were American ideas he learned by watching the Red Ball Express, and they worked. By 1955, Germany was growing again. They called it the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle. Factories were humming, cars were rolling off assembly lines, stores were full of food and clothes and things people had not seen in a decade. Weber's children were teenagers now, healthy and fed and going to good schools. They lived in a new apartment with electricity and running water and heat in the winter. His daughter wanted to go to university. His son wanted to be an engineer. They had never known real hunger and could barely remember the years right after the war. They were growing up in a different Germany, one that was learning to be abundant instead of efficient, productive instead of precise. Weber sometimes met with other former officers, men who had fought in the war and survived. They drank coffee in clean cafes and talked about the old days, though none of them really wanted to remember. One evening, a man who had been a panzer commander said he was writing a book about why Germany lost. He asked Weber what he thought the real reason was. Weber thought for a long time before answering. "We worshipped generals," he finally said. "We thought war was about tactics and training and having the best equipment. We built tanks that were better than theirs. We trained soldiers who could outfight theirs. But we forgot that war is not a duel. It is not about who is more skilled. It is about who can keep fighting longer." The Americans understood this. They did not try to build the best tank, they built 50,000 good enough tanks. They did not try to create the perfect supply system, they built a system that worked even when parts of it failed. We were trying to win battles, they were trying to win production, and production always wins in the end. The panzer commander wrote that down in his notebook. His book would be published 2 years later and become required reading in German business schools. A whole generation of German managers would learn that abundance beats efficiency, that systems matter more than genius, that the most important victories happen in factories and warehouses and on highways where trucks drive through the night. Weber never forgot what he learned from the Red Ball Express. He carried it with him for the rest of his life. When he trained young managers at his company, he told them about the American soldiers who threw away chocolate, who left broken trucks on the side of the road, who made ice cream in the middle of a war. He told them these things not to mock the Americans, but to show them what real power looked like. Power was not about doing more with less. Power was about having so much that you could afford to waste some and still have more than your competitor. That was the lesson. That was what the Red Ball Express taught him and what Germany had to learn if it wanted to succeed in the new world. On his desk at work, Weber kept a small painted stone. It was nothing special, just a rock his son had found and painted red. A red circle like the ones on those American trucks. When people asked what it meant, Weber would smile and say it was a reminder. A reminder that the most important battles are won before the shooting starts, in the minds of engineers and the plans of logistics officers and the decisions of leaders who understand that wealth is not just money, but the ability to make things, move things, and keep making and moving them no matter what. That was the real lesson of the war. Not who was braver or smarter, but who could deliver. And delivery, Weber knew, was everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.